Good morning. When I proposed to the worship team a reflection on POTUUS, P-O-T-U-U-S, I knew I wanted to talk to you about Unitarian presidents of the United States, P-O-T-U-S. POTUS, who were not named Thomas Jefferson. And with William Howard Taft, our 27th president and the 10th Supreme Court Justice, I could spend 2 entire Sundays talking about him. Alas, Taft's explanation of his Unitarian beliefs in his speech, The Religious Convictions of an American Citizen, will have to wait for another Sunday. I'm not hearing disappointed groans from you. Today, I want to share the words of this prophetic person who challenged us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. I will recite President Taft's address at the laying of the cornerstone of the Universalist Church of Irvington, Portland, Oregon, on October 3rd, 1909. But first, a brief biography. Born in 1857 in Cincinnati, Ohio, President William Howard Taft came from a well-known Republican family. His family was affiliated with the First Unitarian Church in Cincinnati. Taft's father, Alfonso, had rejected the Baptist faith to become Unitarian, and young Will attended Sunday school there. He followed his father's footsteps in other ways as well. Taft went to Yale University and studied law. He was an excellent lawyer, and his career was furthered by his family's political connections. His father, Alfonso, had served as Secretary of War and Attorney General for President Ulysses Grant. And so Alfonso's son rose in politics through his own competence, and because, as he once wrote, he always had his plate the right side up when offices were falling. President Benjamin Harrison appointed Taft Solicitor General and later made him an appeals court judge. Taft enjoyed being a judge, and he hoped to be on the Supreme Court, but in 1900, President William McKinley asked Taft to help set up a new civilian government for the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. Taft served as the first non-military governor. Sympathetic towards the Filipinos, he improved the economy, built roads and schools, and gave the people at least some participation in government. In 1904, Taft accepted appointment as Secretary of War for President Theodore Roosevelt. Taft traveled the globe and advised Roosevelt on both military policy and foreign policy. They were good friends, and Roosevelt became convinced that Taft shared his philosophy of progressive government. Roosevelt had promised not to seek a third term in 1908, so he endorsed Taft as his successor. However, during this campaign, on the Republican ticket, his liberal faith surfaced after he received countless letters saying that a Unitarian atheist should not be allowed to occupy the White House. The Hartford Herald newspaper accused him of looking upon Jesus not as Savior, but as, quote, common bastard and low cunning imposter, end quote. Nevertheless, nationally, Taft won an overwhelming victory. But it soon became clear that Taft's presidency would not resemble Roosevelt's. Taft recognized that his techniques would differ from those of his predecessor. He used laws rather than executive power or force of personality to move forward his agenda. Taft once commented that Roosevelt, quote, ought more often to have admitted the legal way of reaching the same ends. Within those constraints, Taft did support the progressive movement. He formed the Interstate Commerce Commission and also expanded U.S. foreign trade through investment in what became known as dollar diplomacy, increasing U.S. influence in Latin America and East Asia. The Taft-era Congress submitted 2 congressional amendments to the states that were ratified in 1913. The 16th Amendment created the federal income tax. The 17th Amendment authorized the direct election of senators. Taft appointed 5 judges to the Supreme Court during his term in office. In 1911, that Supreme Court ordered the dissolution of Standard Oil Company and the American Tobacco Company for being in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, and that's just 2 of 80 antitrust lawsuits Taft had filed. In the 1912 election, Republicans renominated Taft, but he lost the Oval Office to Democrat Woodrow Wilson. Taft, free of the presidency, became president of the General Assembly of Unitarian and other Christian churches in 1915, at which time the General Conference was absorbed by the Unitarian Association. He served as professor of law at Yale until President Warren Harding made him Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1921. To Taft, the appointment was his greatest honor. He wrote, quote, "I don't remember I was ever president." He served on the Supreme Court until his poor health compelled him to retire. He died on March 8th of 1930 at the age of 72 and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. When I tell you that Taft shaped the Oval Office and the Supreme Court, I mean that literally. On Taft's inauguration day, Congress approved $40,000 to double the size of the West Wing in the White House. Architect Nathan Wyatt created the Oval Office space. And speaking of ovals, yes, while president, Taft did have a custom-made 7-foot-long porcelain bathtub expressly for his 6-foot-tall, 330-pound body. Later, as Chief Justice, Taft's interest in civil architecture found its expression when he engaged the architect Cass Gilbert to design the Supreme Court building, a marble landmark on 1st Street Northeast that remains in use on Capitol Hill today. But how did Taft shape the Oval Office and the Supreme Court abstractly? How did his Unitarian beliefs leave a lasting impact? To explore that, I read verbatim his actual address from October 3rd, 1909. I don't know that anybody questions the propriety of my attendance on this occasion, or that it is necessary for me to enter into an explanation. I conceive it to be the duty of the President of the United States to welcome and encourage and support every instrument by which the standard of morals and religion in the community may be elevated and maintained. It was my pleasure and my opportunity to take part in the dedication of an Orthodox Congregational church in Washington in the spring. My pleasure to take part in ceremonies in a Jewish tabernacle in Pittsburgh. To officiate as the lay of the cornerstone of a Roman Catholic university in Helena, and now to take part in what I may in the ceremonies of laying the cornerstone of a Universalist church in this beautiful suburb of Portland. And I do it because I believe that the cornerstone of modern civilization must continue to be religion and morality. We have in our Constitution separated the civil from the religious. It was at one time my good fortune to visit Rome in order by negotiation to effect a settlement of a number of questions which had arisen between the Roman Catholic Church and the civil government in the Philippines. The government in the Philippines under Spain had illustrated that system known as the Spanish government as the union of church and state. Their interests were so inextricably united that it seemed almost possible to separate them. But with the consent and acquiescence of all denominations in the country, I was authorized to go to Rome to meet the head of the great Roman Catholic Church in order to see if those matters might not be settled amicably. I am glad to say that the result of the visit was a satisfactory settlement, equitable and just to both sides. But I started to mention it in order to relate that I ventured to say to the Pope that the division between church and state in this country and their separation was not in the slightest degree to be taken as an indication that there was anything in our government or in our people which was opposed to the church and its highest development. And I ventured to point out in the United States the Roman Catholic Church had flourished and grown as it had not grown in many European countries, and that had received at the hands of the government as liberal and as just and as equal treatment as every other church, no better and no worse. But that was not to be and taken as an indication that every officer of the government properly charged with his responsibility would not use all of the official influence he had to encourage the establishment of churches, their maintenance, and the broadening of their influence in order that morality and religion might prevail throughout the country. This is a Universalist church, known as a liberal church. I think it must have been a Universalist who said that Universalists believed that they would be saved because God was good, and that Unitarians would be saved because Unitarians were good. But whatever the creed, we have reached a time in our country when the churches are growing together, when they are losing the bitterness of sectarian dispute, when they appreciate that it is necessary, in order that their influence be felt, that they stand shoulder to shoulder in the contest for righteousness. They believe in the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. And the real broad Christian statesman is glad to accept from every quarter the assistance which will elevate the people and lead them on in that progress which we all believe the American people are making. If they are not attaining higher moral standards, then all this material progress, all this advance in luxury and comfort is worth nothing. I am an optimist. I believe we are better today than we were 50 years ago, man to man. I believe we are more altruistic. I believe each man is more interested in his fellow than he was 50 or 100 years ago. I know you can point to instances of self-depravity, of selfishness and greed, but I believe those instances are made more prominent because we condemn them more, and because by being made prominent, the happening of them is made less likely. I'm glad to be here. I hope this church will thrive. I hope it will maintain its high principles of making a good man and a good citizen and mixing them together. I welcome the opportunity to be able, as President of the United States, to say there is no church in this country, however humble, which preaching true religion, which preaching true morality, will not have my support and my earnest effort to make it more successful when opportunity offers. Unfortunately, the church did not thrive as Taft had originally intended, but he would have oddly appreciated. After a decade, a Lutheran church took over the space, eventually selling to the Metropolitan Community Church in the late 1970s. The Metropolitan congregation moved away North Portland, so that in 2001, Steeplejack Brewing, a restaurant that serves burgers and craft beers, opened its first location in the 111-year-old building. A brewery would not be out of place because President Taft fought against prohibition on alcohol. He vetoed the Interstate Liquor Law of 1913, which put federal regulations on shipping alcoholic beverages and prohibited the shipment of liquor into dry states. He felt it was wrong for the most Unitarian Universalist of reasons. It was overreach by the federal government, which subverted the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process of society at large. Taft said, quote, "I am opposed to national prohibition. I think it is a mixing of the national government in matters that ought to be one of local settlement. I think it will vest in the national government and those who administer it so great a power as to be dangerous in political matters. So I offer a toast to President William Taft, a Unitarian in the Oval Office."